The night of the carnival was even more dazzling than the day. The air was thick with the scent of beer and sizzling sausages, multicolored lights flickering between the narrow alleys, illuminating thousands of ecstatic faces. The energy of Cologne's carnival pulled me in effortlessly. My steps swayed with the rhythm of the music, laughter and cheers blending into a chaotic symphony that made it feel as though the entire city had surrendered to this never-ending celebration. I wandered through the crowd alone, my beer foaming at the rim of my cup, my mood lifted by the festival's intoxicating fervor. I had never seen a night so surreal, so dreamlike. Reality itself seemed to dissolve under the weight of joy, transforming into something lawless yet irresistibly inviting. And in the midst of it all, I saw it, the mask that would make me the center of it all. A small, worn-out stall lurked at the end of a dimly lit alley, oddly out of place amid the surrounding chaos. Flickering candlelight cast unsteady shadows over an assortment of masks, each one seemingly carrying a story of its own. But my eyes locked onto just one. A Venetian mask, shimmering gold, its surface adorned with intricate, swirling engravings, its edges catching the dim light like molten metal. It was perfect, so perfect that I couldn't resist reaching out, my fingers grazing its cold surface. For a split second, I had the strangest sensation. As if it wasn't just an object. As if it was waiting. I didn't know why I bought it. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was the sheer recklessness of the carnival's feverish joy stripping away my inhibitions. But the moment I put it on, something changed. Stepping back into the streets, I felt eyes on me. Not with fear, not with confusion, but admiration. Their gazes lingered, like they were looking at someone who had always belonged here. Someone who was meant to be the king of the carnival. A figure worthy of attention. Women smiled at me, moving closer, their fingers brushing against my arm as they handed me their drinks. Bartenders poured without asking, as if my presence alone was payment enough. Street performers pulled me into their dances. Strangers raised their glasses to me, toasting with an unspoken reverence. As if I was royalty. As if I had always been. Dizzy with excitement and indulgence, I ignored the little things. The wrong things. Like when I caught my reflection in a bar window and saw that it moved slower than I did, its smile curling just a little too deep. Like when I snapped a selfie and noticed that the angle was off, my head tilting slightly in the photo, but I hadn't moved. Like when a drunk man stumbled into me, then reeled backward, his face paling as his breath hitched in his throat. His lips trembled as he whispered, barely forming the words. "Your face, it's moving." But I didn't care. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the delirium of the night. I lifted my glass, let the crowd swallow me whole, and gave myself to the madness. I was the king of the carnival. The center of it all. The heartbeat of the night. Only when dawn broke did I finally drag myself back to the hotel, the mask still fused to my face. Exhaustion took me the moment I hit the bed, my limbs heavy, my mind slipping into unconsciousness. And just before I was gone, I swear I heard it. A whisper. A chuckle. Low, distant. Rising from the depths of the mask. Morning light seeped through the gaps in the curtains, pale and distant. I drifted awake, the weight of a hangover pressing down on me like something heavy and inescapable. My skull throbbed, my throat was dry, and my limbs felt sluggish, like I had been trapped in a dream too dense to escape. I reached up to rub my face. My fingers met something cold. A chill ripped through my spine. The mask was still there. I sat up too fast, my pulse spiking as the room spun around me. The air smelled damp, stale, suffocating. Last night's revelry felt like a distant memory, replaced by something wrong, something watching. I stumbled to the bathroom. The mirror reflected a man still wearing a golden mask. Me. But it felt tighter now. There was no gap between it and my skin. I reached up, fingers searching for an edge, some way to peel it off. Nothing. I pressed harder, nails digging along the sides, trying to lift it. Nothing. It didn't just stick to my face. It was becoming my face. I grabbed a damp towel, rubbed frantically. I tried prying it loose with my nails. I even took a knife, a small, trembling blade, and carefully pressed it to the edge of the mask, just enough to wedge it under. Pain. Deep. Raw. Like I wasn't peeling away a mask. I was peeling my own skin. Panic crashed over me, sharp and suffocating. My breath hitched, my back damp with cold sweat. I lifted my gaze to the mirror again, and my reflection had changed. The golden engravings on the mask. They were moving. A slow, pulsing ripple, like something alive beneath the surface. And the worst part? The smile. It had shifted. Only slightly. But enough. Enough to tell me that whatever was behind the mask, it was smiling more than I was. I whirled around, my body shaking. The room was empty. Then, a knock at the door. Sharp. Urgent. I forced myself to move, to stagger toward the door. My hand trembled as I lifted the peephole cover. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The knocking stopped. I let out a shaky breath, half laughing at my paranoia. Then I heard it again. Not from the door. From the bathroom. A soft, deliberate tap 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 against the mirror. My chest locked up. I turned slowly. The mirror was still there. My reflection was still there. But now, it was knocking. I hit the ground, legs giving out beneath me, my body shivering uncontrollably. This wasn't just a mask. It wasn't just on me. It was in me. Seeping. Taking. Twisting me into something else. Time felt wrong, the clock on the wall frozen at last night's hour. The outside world remained gray, as if the sun had never truly risen. I was no longer sure if I was still here, or if something else was here instead of me. The thought wouldn't leave my mind. Ever since I realized the mask couldn't come off, my world had started to fall apart. The city was still alive with celebration. The energy of the carnival hadn't faded. Music spilled through the streets, laughter rang through the alleys. But the moment I stepped into the crowd, I was invisible. The strangers who had admired me last night now walked past me without a second glance. The women who had smiled at me, who had touched my arm, no longer even saw me. The bartender who had handed me free drinks, he ignored me. The street performers, they moved aside at the last second, as if their instincts warned them away. As if I were nothing more than empty air. The worst part? I found the people I had celebrated with last night, and they didn't remember me. Blank stares. Furrowed brows. They didn't just forget my face. They forgot my name. Like I had been erased from their memories. No, not just erased. Replaced. I turned to the nearest mirror, gripping the sink as I stared into the glass. The golden mask was still there, clinging to my skin. But something was wrong. My face. It was changing. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. But when I reached up, running my fingers along my jawline, it was shallower than before. Smoother. Like my features were being worn away. I opened my mouth to speak, but the sound was muffled, as if my voice was trapped beneath layers of thick cloth, distant and fading. Panic surged. I clawed at the edges of the mask, my nails digging into my skin, ripping at it. Pain. Sharp. Searing. Blood trickled from the cracks, but I couldn't tell where the mask ended, where I began. I tried to cry, but my eyes stayed dry. Nothing. Just emptiness where my tears should have been. Then, A noise from outside. The distant cheers of the carnival. I turned to the window, staring at the festival goers moving through the streets. But in the reflection of the glass, the crowd was different. Scattered among the revelers, figures stood still. Dozens of them, all wearing masks identical to mine. They were watching me, their heads tilted ever so slightly, and their hands reached out. Slowly, they beckoned me forward. I staggered back, my pulse hammering, my thoughts tangled in panic. I spun toward the door, and it opened by itself. The hallway outside was dim. The lights flickered, struggling to stay alive. And somewhere down the corridor, footsteps. Fast. Coming closer. I held my breath, stepping backward into my room. I reached for the door and shut it. But just before it closed, I saw something. A sliver of golden light, peeking through the narrowing gap. Someone stood at the end of the hallway. A figure, wearing the same mask. But it wasn't me. Its head tilted. Its lips curled into a smile I recognized. Then, the lights went out. The room was suffocatingly silent. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, deafening, drowning out every other sound. Darkness flooded in like a rising tide, swallowing everything. I collapsed onto the floor, my body trembling uncontrollably, my mind shredded by terror. I wanted to wake up. I wanted to tear the mask off. I wanted to see my own face again. But I couldn't remember it. What did I used to look like? I tried to recall, tried to piece together the memory of my own features. But there was nothing. Just an empty, formless void where my face should have been. I turned back to the mirror. The golden mask still clung to my reflection. But then I realized something horrifying. The person in the mirror wasn't moving. Not at all. The mask was still there, perfectly frozen in place. But it no longer belonged to me. A strangled breath caught in my throat. My pulse spiked. I whirled around and ran, blindly, desperately. I stumbled out of the room, my feet barely keeping up as I bolted down the stairs, crashing through the hotel's exit into the freezing night. Wind howled through the streets. The carnival lights still burned bright, the music still played, the revelers still danced. But I felt utterly alone. Like a hunted animal, I ran, heart hammering, breath ragged. I had to find help. I had to fix this. Then, I saw the hospital. I didn't think. I just rushed inside. The bright, sterile lights of the emergency room burned into my retinas, too real, too sharp. A doctor approached me, motioning for me to sit. I forced myself to breathe, to steady my shaking voice. He leaned in, his expression shifting into something uncertain. His gloved hand lifted, tweezers in hand. He studied the mask carefully. Then, his face froze. A quiet, creeping horror settled into his features. His fingers brushed against my cheek. He pressed, just lightly. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Philip, where's your face?" My heart stopped. I turned. I looked at the mirror on the opposite wall. And I saw nothing. The mask was gone. And in its place, a smooth, empty surface. No eyes. No nose. No mouth. Just a blank, featureless void.